I don't think I need that. So I just want to say that it is a real special opportunity for me to be able to preach on the morning that we are celebrating George Chesley and his service here at the church. And like Dave, I found George to be a rock of integrity and wisdom, and I just want to thank George too for all the help he gave me in my years of being pastor here. I get to talk about reason. I told Cindy I was a little bit in a quandary about what to wear today as a retired pastor, and she said, wear something reasonable. So I thought, what's my most reasonable thing? And I thought, probably what she gave you for Christmas. So that's why I'm wearing what I'm wearing today. You know, it's always kind of funny when you preach too. You think that you have sent the right scripture into people and that what you've planned is what's going to happen, and then lo and behold, you get here and the scripture is not what you intended to have read. So the actual scripture from Corinthians should have been from the 14th chapter of Corinthians, the 20th verse. And I think when you hear this, it will make a lot more sense to you than the verse that Debbie read. So, this is 1 Corinthians 14, verse 20. Brothers and sisters, do not be children in your thinking. Rather, be infants in evil, but in thinking, be adults. So, may God add the blessing to the reading of the scripture. Would you bow with me in prayer? Oh God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So I want you to know that I am not a cradle-to-the-grave Methodist. When I was born, my parents were solidly grounded in the Lutheran Church. My family lived in Wasco, Oregon. And a few months after my birth, I was presented for baptism at St. Mark's Lutheran Church in Salem, Oregon, because my dad was working on his master's degree at Willamette University. At the end of that summer, we didn't go back to Wasco. In fact, we went to Cape Junction, Oregon, where my dad had taken a job at the high school teaching English and history. And in Cape Junction, there was not a Lutheran church. In fact, there was, I think, only one Protestant church that was a few blocks from where we lived. It was a very fundamental, conservative, dogmatic church where my mom took my 3 older siblings and I, but my dad would very, very rarely go to church with us. When I was 5, the Methodists came to town. And I'm sure that my dad had some ambivalent feelings about the Methodists. He had gone to school at Willamette and I think had some good exposure to Methodists. But growing up on the plains of North Dakota, he would often listen to the radio with his mother, and my grandmother Larson would talk about the screaming Methodists, and whenever the Methodists came on, she would turn off the radio. So I think my dad was really quite ambivalent, but one day my mom came to him and said, Vernon, if you will start to come to church with us, I'll take the kids and we will leave the church we belong to and we'll start going to the Methodist church. It's kind of interesting. The pastor who came and founded the church at Cape Junction was Bob Kingsbury, who was married to Shirley Fawson, who grew up here in Bend. So clear back then, I had kind of a Bend connection, though I didn't know how that would work out. But I'm sure my mom and my dad met with Bob Kingsbury a few times, just so that my dad could check him out and find out where he was coming from. He would have an opportunity to ask some questions about faith and scriptural interpretation. And within a few months, my dad started to come to church with us. And he very rarely missed a Sunday from that point on. He became very active in the leadership of the church in Cave Junction and helped it get off to a good start. Eventually, my dad became my high school Sunday school teacher. By now, we had moved from Cave Junction to Oregon City. And I think you know that youth at that age are always filled with questions. Questions about the virgin birth, questions about miracles, questions about the creation accounts in the scriptures, questions about the values and the opinions of the older generation in the church. And my dad, and I'm sure that a lot of this had to do with the fact that he was a good educator, never balked at the questions that we raised. Nor did he provide easy pat answers for us. He provided an environment where we were welcome to state our doubts, where we could argue, we could discuss whatever question happened to be the topic of the day. He was always ready to remind us of the gift of our brains and the fact that we could think, and that it was one of the greatest gifts that human beings possess. And he encouraged us to get as much education as we possibly could. And I think that one of the most proud things that my dad had, there were 6 kids in our family, and all 6 of us went to college and graduated with degrees, and I think that that was really something that my dad would consider one of his greatest accomplishments. In the Sunday school class, he would sometimes talk about John Wesley, and how Wesley made our ability to reason and think and to learn as one of the cornerstones for how we form our beliefs, about how we experience God and how we shape our actions and behaviors. I hope that you all know that John Wesley was a very well-educated person. Yet because the people who were attracted to Methodism were often uneducated street people prone to enthusiastic outbursts of praise and religious fervor, the first Methodists were easy targets for the Church of England and other established churches who often accused the Methodists of abandoning their abilities to think and reason. Nor was Wesley afraid to confront and criticize the behavior of the leaders of the Church of England, who used Wesley's unorthodox ideas and practices as a reason to shame and discredit him. If you are so inclined, and you have the time, and it will take a little time to do this, you might want to read Wesley's writing titled An Earnest Appeal to Men of Reason and Religion. In his essay, he defends the Methodists, saying, "This is the very religion we preach, a religion evidently founded on and in every way agreeable to eternal reason, to the essential nature of things. Its foundation stands on the nature of God and the nature of man, together with their mutual relations, and it is in every way suitable thereto, to the nature of God, for it begins in knowing him, and where but in the true knowledge of God can you conceive true religion to begin? It goes on in loving him and all mankind, for you cannot but imitate whom you love. It ends in serving him, in doing his will, in obeying him whom we know and love." A little later in his essay, Wesley writes, But perhaps by reason you mean the faculty of reasoning, of inferring one thing from another. There are many, it is confessed, that utterly decry the use of reason, that condemn all reasoning concerning the things of God as utterly destructive of true religion. But we can in no wise agree with this. Wesley knew that a human brain is a terrible thing to waste, and he put the Methodists on the forefront of educating the masses through Sunday schools and through the creation of colleges and universities. This is one of the main reasons why I'm happy being a United Methodist and proud of our legacy as a Christian movement. I've always felt encouraged to think for myself, to learn from others, to seek out knowledge. I've never felt like I've had to abandon scientific or historic insights in order to remain faithful to a certain dogma or institution. I've been encouraged to use my brain and to continue to learn more about the world that I live in, the people that I come in contact with, and the God that I love and that I serve. And I hope and I pray that the course of my ministry has been one where I encouraged and welcomed people to do exactly the same thing. One of the things that I have really enjoyed the most about my retirement has been the extra time and the new opportunities to learn and reason with different groups of people. I've become active in a continuing education program through the University of Oregon, and over the last 4 years I've taken classes in history, in art appreciation, in science. It's been very interesting, and I have to say sometimes quite challenging to study in a secular environment rather than in a faith-based community. Many of the people who attend class with me are people who are atheists or agnostics and do not affiliate themselves with any church or denomination. But I have to tell you, it's amazing to me how much I know, how much they know. And I find them to be just as faithful in their studies and in their endeavors to know about their world as I have been in my study of my faith. They are just as concerned about making our world a more just and a more equitable and a more peaceful place. I'm learning a lot from my participation in Ollie, and one of the things that I'm learning is that I have a lot more kinship out there in the world than I ever imagined possible when I was serving in the church. Just before Christmas, I finished a seminar on how we humans think. I came away from the class appreciating just how amazing and unpredictable our brains are. Our brains think fast, and we aren't even aware of the information that we're taking in and reacting to. Our brains think slow, and we sort and analyze the information presented to us to form a value or take in an action. But even then, we're subject to biases and to habitual behaviors and to fears about change that cause us to act sometimes in very irrational ways. Sometimes, even though my intention is to be reasonable, my actions and behaviors reveal just how unreasonable I can be. One of the aha moments in the class came to me when we were listening to a lecture by Dr. Robert Sapolsky called "Are Human Beings Just Another Primate?" Dr. Sapolsky is a neuroendocrinologist and professor at Stanford University who studied baboons as a way to gain insight into human behavior. He's undoubtedly one of the most intelligent people that I have ever encountered. He's also a self-proclaimed atheist. Towards the end of his lecture, that was in many ways way over my intellectual capabilities. My ears suddenly perked up when he shared that one of the things that distinguish us as human beings is the ability to gain strength and the will to do something from irrefutable evidence that that something cannot be. He offered a quote from the great Danish theologian Søren Kierkegaard that stated, "Christian faith requires that faith persists in the face of the impossible, and that humans have the capacity to simultaneously believe in two contradictory things." He then offered as an example of someone who demonstrates this ability, Sister Helen Prejean, who I have to tell you would be near to the top of my list for people who reflect the Spirit and the life of Jesus. Sister Prejean was featured in a movie that I'm guessing quite a few may have seen called Dead Man Walking. Her ministry has been with men who are on death row, and she's inevitably asked how she could spend her whole life serving the needs and solacing the most terrifying, evil, and damaging people that we can possibly imagine. Sister Prejean's answer is always the same. The less forgivable the act, the more we must try to find the means to forgive. The less lovable a person might be, the more we must find the means to love them. Sapolsky says that this is one of the most irrational, nutty, magnificent things that we're capable of as human beings. The more something cannot be, the more we have to make sure that it is. And in a world where the most logical and reasonable things to conclude is that none of us can do anything to make our world better because we're too small or we're too powerless, the more we make the conclusion that we can't make a difference, the more ardently we have to become in trying to usher in what cannot be. From the lips of an atheist came an insight on why it's important, why it's a moral imperative for people of faith to keep living and loving in the way of Jesus. I told you that I'm not a cradle to the grave United Methodist. I didn't begin as one, and though the chances are fairly slim, there is a possibility that I won't end up as one. But this I will assure you of. I will never take the gift of my brain or my ability to reason for granted. I will continue to learn and to grow and to think, even when those endeavors lead me to insights and conclusions that seem contradictory or impossible, sometimes even irrational. For everything new that I learn moves me just a little bit more in the direction of God and the revealing of the mystery of all that God is. Amen. Let us worship with our